The alarm clock buzzed at 5 a.m., cutting through the darkness of her small apartment. Jessica rubbed her eyes and smiled despite the early hour. Today was different. Today was the day she had been working toward for the past 6 months. She walked to her closet and pulled out her best business suit, the navy blue one she had bought on sale but saved for special occasions. As she got dressed, her mind wandered to all the late nights, weekend work sessions, and countless cups of coffee that had led to this moment. The Henderson account was huge. Landing this client would change everything for her career at the marketing firm. In the kitchen, she made her usual breakfast but found herself too nervous to eat much. The contract folder sat on her counter, thick with proposals, charts, and presentation materials. She had rehearsed her pitch so many times that she could probably give it in her sleep. But this wasn't just any presentation. The Henderson Group was known for being tough. They had turned down 3 other agencies before agreeing to meet with her company. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss, from Flight 447 to Atlanta. "Don't mess this up, Jess. This could be the breakthrough we need." No pressure at all, she thought with a nervous laugh. The taxi ride to the airport felt longer than usual. Denver's morning traffic crawled along the highway, while Jessica watched other commuters in their cars, probably heading to normal jobs where million-dollar deals didn't hang in the balance. She had worked at smaller companies before, but this was her first real shot at the big leagues. At the airport, she checked in and felt her heart skip when she saw First Class, Seat 2A, printed on her boarding pass. She had never flown first class before. The upgrade had cost her almost a month's worth of grocery money, but her boss had suggested it would help her arrive fresh and confident for the meeting. "Image matters in this business," he had said. The check-in agent smiled and handed her the golden boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Rodriguez. You'll be boarding with our premium passengers in just a few minutes." Jessica found a quiet corner near the gate and pulled out her phone to call her mom. "Mija, how are you feeling?" her mother asked in her familiar warm voice. "Nervous, Mom. Really nervous. What if I mess this up? What if they don't like the presentation? What if—" "Stop," her mother interrupted gently. "You've worked so hard for this. Remember when you were little and afraid to ride your bike without training wheels? You thought you'd fall, but you didn't. You rode all the way down the street with the biggest smile on your face." Jessica laughed, remembering that day. She had been 7 years old and convinced she would crash into the neighbor's fence. Instead, she had discovered the joy of flying down the sidewalk with the wind in her hair. "Thanks, Mom. I needed to hear that. Call me when you land, okay? And remember, no matter what happens, your father and I are proud of you." As she hung up, Jessica felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. They had worked multiple jobs to put her through college, never complaining about the long hours or tired feet. This presentation wasn't just about her career. It was about honoring their sacrifice and proving that their dreams for her had been worth it. The gate agent announced first-class boarding, and Jessica gathered her things. Walking down the jet bridge, she couldn't help but smile. The little girl who used to practice English pronunciation in the mirror was about to sit in first class on her way to the biggest meeting of her career. She found her seat and sank into the leather chair, amazed by how much space she had. The flight attendant offered her a warm towel and asked if she'd like something to drink before takeoff. Jessica requested orange juice, thinking it would help calm her stomach. As she settled in, she pulled out her presentation materials one more time. The numbers looked good on paper, but would they be enough? The Henderson Group had built their company from a small family business into a national corporation. They probably saw dozens of presentations like hers every month. Other passengers began boarding, and Jessica watched them file past her seat. There were business travelers like herself, families with excited children pointing at the airplane windows, and elderly couples holding hands as they found their seats. Flying always reminded her how many different stories were happening at the same time. All these people with their own destinations and dreams. She opened her laptop and scrolled through her presentation slides one more time. The color scheme looked professional. The charts were clear and the budget projections were realistic. She had spent weeks researching the Henderson Group's history, their values, and their recent business moves. She knew their story almost, as well as her own company's. A businessman in the seat across from her was already on his phone, talking loudly about some deal in Chicago. Jessica wondered if he was nervous too, or if confidence came naturally after years of flying to important meetings. She had only been in her current position for 2 years, and imposter syndrome still crept in sometimes. What if they could tell she didn't really belong in first class? What if her presentation wasn't sophisticated enough for a company like Henderson? She closed her laptop and took a deep breath. Her reflection in the airplane window showed a professional woman in a sharp suit, but inside she still felt like that little girl practicing her English pronunciation. The difference was that now she knew that feeling nervous didn't mean she wasn't ready. It just meant she cared about doing well. The flight attendant made the safety announcement as more passengers found their seats. Jessica put on her seatbelt and tried to relax. 4 hours to Atlanta, then a taxi to the Henderson building, then the presentation that could change everything. She had prepared as much as possible. Now it was time to trust herself and the work she had put in. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Jessica thought about her apartment back in Denver. It wasn't much, just a small 1-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and a view of the parking lot. But it was hers, paid for with her own hard work. If this presentation went well, maybe she could afford something bigger. Maybe she could finally pay back her parents for all those years of support. Maybe she could prove to herself that she really did belong in rooms where million-dollar decisions were made. The engines roared to life, and Jessica felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that came with takeoff. In a few hours, she would know whether months of preparation had been worth it. For now, she was going to enjoy her first taste of first-class travel and try to arrive in Atlanta feeling confident and ready for whatever the Henderson Group threw at her. The plane was still boarding when Jessica noticed the commotion near the front of the economy section. She had been reviewing her notes one last time when the sound of someone struggling caught her attention. Looking up from her laptop, she saw a young woman moving very slowly down the narrow aisle, one hand pressed against her lower back and the other gripping the seat tops for support. The woman was clearly pregnant, and not just a little bit. Her belly was so large that she had to turn sideways to fit between the seats, taking careful steps as if each movement required extra thought. Behind her, a man who appeared to be her husband carried 2 small bags and watched her with the kind of worried expression that Jessica recognized from her own father's face whenever her mother wasn't feeling well. Other passengers were getting impatient. Jessica could hear someone behind the couple sighing loudly, and a businessman near the front was checking his watch repeatedly. The flight attendants were trying to help, but the aisle was narrow, and there wasn't much room to maneuver around someone who needed to move so carefully. "Excuse me, sorry," the pregnant woman said softly as she squeezed past a man putting his carry-on in the overhead bin. Her voice had a slight accent that Jessica couldn't quite place, but there was something apologetic in her tone that made Jessica's heart ache. Why should she be sorry for needing a little extra time? The woman's husband stayed close behind her, occasionally reaching out to steady her when she paused to catch her breath. He whispered something in what sounded like Spanish, and she nodded, back at him with a tired smile. Jessica found herself holding her breath, watching this slow procession and wondering how far back their seats were. As they passed the first-class section, Jessica got a better look at the couple. The woman looked young, maybe in her early 20s with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Despite her obvious discomfort, she had a gentle face and kind eyes. Her husband appeared to be about the same age, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked like his best clothes. He carried himself with the careful posture of someone trying to look confident in an unfamiliar situation. They continued moving toward the back of the plane, and Jessica realized with growing concern that they were heading to the very last rows. Those seats were always the most cramped, with barely any legroom and no space to recline. For someone in her condition, it would be miserable for a 4-hour flight. The boarding process seemed to take forever as the couple made their way down the aisle. Other passengers squeezed around them, some showing patience and others clearly annoyed by the delay. Jessica noticed how the woman kept apologizing to everyone, as if her pregnancy was somehow an inconvenience she was causing on purpose. When they finally reached row 31, Jessica's fears were confirmed. The couple had been assigned seats 31E and 31F, middle seats in the very back row, squeezed between strangers on both sides. The woman looked at her boarding pass, then at the narrow space between the seats, and Jessica saw her shoulders slump slightly. The man in the aisle seat reluctantly got up to let her in, clearly irritated by the disruption. The woman tried to sit down, but her belly made it almost impossible to fit in the tight space. She had to lean forward at an awkward angle, and even then, the seatbelt wouldn't reach around her comfortably. From her first-class seat, Jessica watched this struggle with growing discomfort of her own. The woman kept trying different positions, her face showing flashes of pain as she attempted to find some way to sit that didn't hurt. Her husband looked helpless, standing in the aisle and whispering words of encouragement that didn't seem to be helping much. The flight attendant came by to check on them, offering a seatbelt extender, but even with that, the woman couldn't seem to get comfortable. She was pressed between two strangers with no room to adjust her position or stretch out her legs. Jessica could see her rubbing her lower back and taking slow, careful breaths as if she was trying not to cry. Other passengers were settling into their seats, stowing their bags and getting ready for takeoff, but Jessica couldn't focus on anything except the scene unfolding in the back of the plane. She had been pregnant once briefly, a few years ago, before she lost the baby early in the first trimester. Even in those early weeks, she remembered how uncomfortable airplane seats could be, how her body felt different and needed more space. She couldn't imagine trying to endure a long flight in the woman's current condition. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they would be taking off shortly and asking everyone to take their seats. Jessica realized that this young woman was going to spend the next 4 hours in agony, squeezed into a space that was barely adequate for a regular-sized person, let alone someone carrying what looked like it might even be twins. She watched as the woman's husband finally sat down next to her, looking just as uncomfortable as his wife but trying to hide it. He kept glancing at her with concern, reaching over to rub her shoulder when she winced. They whispered to each other in Spanish, and while Jessica couldn't understand everything they were saying, their body language told the whole story. They were worried, uncomfortable, and probably regretting their decision to fly. Jessica looked around at the first-class cabin where she was sitting. Her seat was huge compared to those economy seats, with plenty of legroom and space to recline. She had a small table for her laptop, extra storage space, and enough room to stretch out comfortably. The leather seat was soft and supportive, designed to make even a long flight pleasant. The contrast between her situation and theirs was striking. Here she was, healthy and comfortable, with more space than she really needed, while 30 rows behind her a pregnant woman was struggling just to sit down without pain. The flight attendants in first class were already offering drinks and warm towels, while the couple in the back was still trying to figure out how to make their seatbelts work. Jessica tried to go back to her presentation materials, but she couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes she found herself glancing toward the back of the plane, wondering how the woman was doing. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and she imagined how every bump and turn must feel in those cramped seats as they prepared for takeoff. Jessica made a decision that surprised even her. She had worked hard for this first-class seat, saved money she didn't really have, and convinced herself she needed it to arrive fresh for her important meeting. But looking at that young couple struggling in the back, she realized that some things were more important than business presentations and career ambitions. Some moments called for simple human kindness, even when it cost something significant. The plane was picking up speed on the runway when Jessica unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her heart pounding with nervous energy about what she was about to do. Jessica's hands were shaking as she stood up from her first-class seat. The plane was still moving toward the runway, and the flight attendant immediately noticed her standing. "Ma'am, please take your seat. We're about to take off," the attendant said with a professional smile. "I need to speak with someone in the back first," Jessica replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "It's important." The flight attendant looked confused but nodded. "Please be quick, we really do need everyone seated." Jessica made her way down the aisle, passing through the business class section and into economy. Her legs felt wobbly, not from the plane's movement, but from what she was about to do. She had never done anything like this before. In fact, she usually kept to herself on flights, avoiding eye contact and focusing on her work or a book. As she walked toward the back, she could see the young couple again. The pregnant woman was shifting uncomfortably in her seat, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. Her husband had his hand on her arm, speaking to her in quiet, worried tones. Even from a distance, Jessica could see the woman's face was pale and strained. When she reached row 31, Jessica took a deep breath and cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me," she said, looking at the couple. Both of them looked up, surprised to see someone standing there. The husband's expression was cautious, probably wondering if there was some problem with their seats or if they had done something wrong. "Hi," Jessica said, suddenly realizing she hadn't planned exactly what to say. "I'm Jessica. I was sitting up in first class and I couldn't help but notice that you're having a hard time getting comfortable." The pregnant woman's cheeks turned slightly pink. "Oh, we're okay," she said quickly. "I'm sorry if we were making too much noise or taking too long to sit down. I know everyone wants to take off on time." Her accent was definitely Spanish, Jessica realized, and there was something so genuinely apologetic in her voice that it made Jessica's chest tighten with emotion. No, you don't need to apologize for anything," Jessica said, crouching down so she was at eye level with them. "I'm actually here because I want to ask you something, and I hope you won't think I'm crazy." The couple exchanged glances, clearly confused about where this conversation was going. "Would you be willing to switch seats with me?" Jessica asked. "I have seat 2A in first class. It's much bigger with lots of legroom and space to get comfortable. I think it would be much better for you, especially for such a long flight." The woman's eyes widened in shock. "What? No, we couldn't possibly. That's so expensive. We can't afford to pay you back for something like that." "You don't understand," Jessica said with a gentle smile. "I'm not asking you to pay me anything. I want to give you my seat. No cost, no strings attached." The husband leaned forward, speaking in rapid Spanish to his wife. Jessica caught enough words to understand he was asking if this was some kind of joke or scam. The woman shook her head, looking just as bewildered as he did. "But why would you do that?" the woman asked. "You don't even know us, and first class costs so much money. Why would you give that up for strangers?" Jessica felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "Because you need it more than I do. You're carrying a baby, maybe babies, and you're in pain. I can see it on your face every time you try to move. I have a healthy body and I can sit anywhere on this plane and be fine. But you can't." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's the kindest thing anyone has ever offered us, but we really can't accept. It's too much. What if something happens to your seat? What if we spill something or break something? We couldn't afford to replace anything in first class." "Nothing's going to happen," Jessica said firmly. "And even if it did, it wouldn't matter. What matters is that you're comfortable and safe for this flight." Other passengers around them were starting to notice the conversation. Some looked curious, others impatient. Jessica could hear someone a few rows up complaining about the delay. The husband spoke up for the first time in English, his accent thick but his words careful. "Miss, this is very kind, but my wife is right. We cannot accept such a big gift from someone we do not know. It is too much." "What's your name?" Jessica asked the woman. "Isabella," she replied softly. "Isabella, how far along are you?" 8 months, Isabella said, unconsciously placing both hands on her belly. "The doctor says the baby could come any time now." "Then you definitely shouldn't be crammed into this tiny seat for 4 hours," Jessica said. "Please let me do this. I promise I'm not expecting anything in return. I just want you to be comfortable." Isabella looked at her husband and they had another quick conversation in Spanish. Jessica heard the words loca and angel mixed in with their discussion. She couldn't help but smile at being called both crazy and an angel in the same sentence. "Why are you traveling?" Jessica asked while they talked it over. Isabella's expression grew more serious. "We are going to Atlanta for the hospital, for special doctors. Our baby. She paused, searching for the right English words. There might be problems. The doctors here in Denver said we need to see specialists. Jessica felt her heart sink. No wonder they looked so worried. This wasn't a vacation or a business trip. They were dealing with a medical emergency, and on top of everything else they had to endure an uncomfortable flight to get the help they needed. Then you absolutely have to take my seat, Jessica said with new determination. You need to arrive, rested and comfortable, not exhausted and in pain from sitting in this cramped space. The flight attendant appeared at Jessica's shoulder. Ma'am, I really need you to return to your seat now. The captain is waiting to take off. We're switching seats, Jessica announced. Is that allowed? The flight attendant looked surprised, but nodded. As long as both parties agree and we update our records, yes, that's fine. But we need to do it quickly. Isabella grabbed Jessica's hand. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Once we switch, you cannot change your mind. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Jessica said, and she meant it. Looking at Isabella's grateful, tearful face, she realized that her first-class seat had never felt as valuable as it did in this moment when she was giving it away. The flight attendant helped them gather their belongings and move quickly. Isabella's husband kept shaking his head in amazement, muttering what sounded like prayers of gratitude in Spanish. As they made their way toward the front of the plane, Jessica felt a strange lightness in her chest, as if she had just set down a heavy weight she didn't know she had been carrying. Thank you, Isabella whispered as they reached the first-class section. I will never forget this kindness. Neither will I, Jessica replied, and she knew that was absolutely true. Jessica settled into seat 31E, the middle seat that Isabella had just vacated. The difference was immediate and jarring. After the spacious leather chair in first class, this felt like sitting in a shoebox. Her knees pressed against the seat, in front of her, and her shoulders touched both armrests at the same time. She couldn't help but smile, though, thinking about how much more comfortable Isabella must be feeling right now. The man to her left, who had been grumpy about the seat, switching, looked at her with confusion. Why would you give up a first-class seat? He asked bluntly. That's got to be worth at least $1,000. Some things are worth more than money, Jessica replied simply, pulling out her laptop to make room for her legs. The man shook, his head like she was completely insane, and went back to his newspaper. But Jessica noticed the older woman across the aisle leaning over with a warm smile. That was beautiful what you just did, the woman whispered. I watched the whole thing. That young lady looked like she was in real pain. She's 8 months pregnant and flying for medical reasons, Jessica explained quietly. I couldn't just sit up there in luxury knowing she was suffering back here. As the plane finally took off, Jessica tried to get comfortable in the cramped space. She opened her laptop to review her presentation one more time, but found it difficult to concentrate. Not because of the tight quarters, but because she kept thinking about Isabella and her husband. Something about their conversation had been bothering her, and it wasn't until now that she realized what it was. When Isabella mentioned they were going to Atlanta for medical care, there had been something in her voice. Fear, yes, but also something that sounded like desperation. And the way her husband had looked when she mentioned the baby might have problems, that wasn't just normal pregnancy anxiety. That was the look of people facing something serious. Jessica tried to focus on her presentation slides, but her mind kept wandering. She found herself listening to conversations around her, something she normally never did on flights. The businessman in front of her was complaining loudly on his phone about delayed meetings. A college student behind her was video chatting with friends about weekend plans, normal travel conversations about normal travel problems. But then she heard something that made her heart skip. From the row directly behind her, she caught fragments of a hushed conversation in Spanish. It was Isabella's husband, talking quietly on his phone. Jessica's college Spanish wasn't perfect, but she understood enough to make out some key words. Gemelos, peligro, cirugía, dinero, twins, danger, surgery, money. Jessica tried not to eavesdrop, but in the cramped quarters it was impossible not to hear. Isabella's husband was speaking with someone back home, updating them on their situation. From what Jessica could piece together, Isabella was carrying twins, but there were serious complications. They needed specialized surgery that was only available in Atlanta, and they had spent everything they had just to make this trip. No tenemos más dinero, she heard him say clearly. We don't have any more money. Jessica felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just a routine medical consultation. This was a life-or-death situation for Isabella and her babies, and they were facing it with empty pockets in a strange city. She heard Isabella's voice joining the conversation, though she was speaking so quietly that Jessica could barely make out the words. But the emotion was clear: worry, fear, and something that sounded like guilt. Jessica caught the phrase "no podemos pagar" several times. We can't pay. Jessica stared at her laptop screen, but the presentation numbers blurred together. Here, she was worried about landing a business deal that might earn her company a few $100,000, while 30 feet away a young couple was dealing with a medical crisis that could bankrupt them, even if everything went well. She thought about her own comfortable life back in Denver, her small apartment that she complained about, but that was safe and paid for, her steady job that she sometimes found boring, but that provided good insurance and regular paychecks, her parents who worried about her being single at 28, but who were healthy and happy in their retirement. Isabella's husband ended his phone call, and Jessica heard him talking quietly to his wife. She couldn't understand everything, but she caught enough to know they were trying to figure out how they would afford to stay in Atlanta for the surgery and recovery period. Someone had told them the procedure could take weeks, maybe months, depending on complications. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? Isabella asked. What are we going to do? Her husband's response was muffled, but Jessica could hear the defeat in his voice. They were scared, far from home, facing medical bills they couldn't afford, and probably wondering if they had made the right decision to come here at all. Jessica closed her laptop and leaned back in her seat, staring at the airplane ceiling. The Henderson presentation suddenly felt less important. Yes, it was a big deal for her career, and yes, landing the account would be great for her company. But in the grand scheme of things, it was just business. Win or lose, she would still have a job, still have a place to live, still have options. Isabella and her babies didn't have options. They had one chance with one set of specialists, in one city, far from home. The flight attendant came by offering drinks, and Jessica asked for water. As she sipped it, she thought about all the things she took for granted: the ability to travel for work without worrying about the cost, health insurance that covered emergencies, family members who could help in a crisis, credit cards for unexpected expenses. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found her boss's number. She typed out a text message, then deleted it and started over. How do you explain to your boss that you might not be in the right mindset for the biggest presentation of your career because you're heartbroken over strangers' problems? Instead, she opened her notes app and started writing down everything she could remember about Atlanta. She had visited the city twice before for work conferences. She knew which hotels were affordable, which neighborhoods were safe, and where to find good, cheap meals. She knew about the public transportation system and which hospitals had the best reputations. Maybe her business knowledge could be useful for something more important than landing clients. Jessica looked toward the front of the plane, wondering how Isabella was doing in the first-class seat. She hoped the extra comfort was helping, but she also wondered if Isabella was up there worrying about the same things her husband had been discussing on the phone. As the plane flew toward Atlanta, Jessica made a decision that surprised her even more than giving up her first-class seat had. She was going to help this family however she could. She didn't know exactly what that meant yet, but she knew she couldn't just walk away after they landed and pretend she had never met them. Some meetings happened in boardrooms with PowerPoint presentations and handshakes over expensive contracts. But sometimes the most important meetings happened in cramped airplane seats, when strangers' lives intersected in ways that changed everything. The seatbelt sign turned off, and Jessica finally had enough room to stretch her legs into the aisle. But somehow, despite the discomfort, she felt more at peace than she had all morning. The plane touched down in Atlanta with a gentle bump, and Jessica felt her stomach flutter with nervous energy. Not about her presentation anymore, but about what she was going to do next. As passengers started gathering their belongings, she could hear Isabella and her husband talking quietly in the first-class section, probably trying to figure out their next steps in an unfamiliar city. Jessica pulled out her phone and quickly typed a message to her boss. Landed safely. Presentation is at 2 p.m. We'll call you after. She hesitated for a moment, then added, might need to reschedule some afternoon meetings. She wasn't sure why she wrote that, but something told her this day wasn't going to go as planned. As they waited to deplane, the elderly woman across the aisle tapped Jessica's arm. I couldn't help but overhear some of that conversation behind us, she whispered. Those poor kids are in real trouble, aren't they? Jessica nodded. Twins with complications. They need surgery here, but I don't think they have much money left. After paying for the flights, the woman shook her head sadly. My grandson was born with heart problems. I know how expensive these medical trips can be. Insurance doesn't cover everything, especially when you're far from home. When the plane door finally opened, Jessica waited until most passengers had left before making her way to the front. Isabella was moving slowly again, one hand on her back and the other gripping the armrest. Her husband carried both their small bags and looked around the cabin nervously. How was the flight? Jessica asked as she approached them. Isabella's face lit up with genuine gratitude. So much better, thank you. I actually got some sleep and the baby stopped kicking so hard. She paused and placed both hands on her belly. Babies, I mean. The doctor said there are 2. Twins, Jessica said with a smile. That's exciting. And scary, Isabella's husband added quietly. Very scary. They walked together toward the gate, moving at Isabella's careful pace. As they reached the terminal, Jessica could see the couple looking around with the lost expression of people in an unfamiliar place. Do you know how to get to your hotel? Jessica asked. Isabella and her husband exchanged glances. We don't have a hotel yet, Isabella admitted. We wanted to see how much the taxi cost to the hospital first, and then find something nearby that we can afford. Jessica's heart sank. They were planning to wander around Atlanta, pregnant and tired, looking for cheap accommodations near the medical center. In a city they didn't know, with limited English, and probably very little money left. I have an idea, Jessica said, pulling out her phone. I've been to Atlanta a few times for work. There's a hotel near the hospital that's clean and safe but not too expensive. Let me call them and see if they have rooms available. Before they could protest, she was dialing the number. Hi, this is Jessica Rodriguez from Morrison Marketing. I've stayed with you before. Yes, I need to book a room for some colleagues who are in town for medical reasons. Tonight, yes, possibly for several weeks. As she talked to the hotel manager, she watched Isabella lean against her husband, exhaustion clear on her face despite the better flight. They were trying to look confident, but Jessica could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Good news, she said after hanging up. They have a room available, and since you're here for medical reasons, they're giving you the long-term rate. It's $40 a night instead of the usual $80. $40 is still, Isabella started to say, then stopped herself. Thank you for calling. We will take a taxi there and see if we can work something out. Jessica looked at her watch. She had 3 hours before her presentation. 3 hours to completely change the direction of her day and possibly her life. I'm coming with you, she announced. I have a rental car and I know the city. We can stop by the hotel, get you settled, and I can show you where the hospital is so you're not lost tomorrow. But don't you have work? Isabella's husband asked. You said you were here for business. I have a meeting this afternoon, but nothing until then, Jessica said, which was technically true. Besides, Atlanta traffic is terrible if you don't know where you're going. Trust me, you don't want to figure it out in a taxi while you're this pregnant. An hour later, Jessica was driving her rental car through Atlanta traffic with Isabella and her husband in the back seat. Isabella had fallen asleep almost immediately, her head on her husband's shoulder. He introduced himself as Diego and told Jessica in halting English about their situation. The doctors in Denver, they say the babies share. He struggled with the word. Share what? Jessica asked gently. Heart, he finally said. They share one heart. Very dangerous. The doctors here, they can separate them, but it is very expensive surgery. And if we wait too long? Jessica felt tears prick her eyes as she drove. Conjoined twins sharing a heart. That wasn't just complicated. It was life-threatening for both babies if they couldn't get the surgery soon. What did the doctors in Denver tell you about timing? She asked. Before the babies are born, Diego said quietly. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. After that, too dangerous. They were racing against time with no money and no support system in a strange city. Jessica thought about her own problems, the presentation, the client, her career goals, and they all seemed incredibly small in comparison. At the hotel, Jessica helped them check in and made sure they had information about public transportation. To the hospital, she wrote down her phone number and insisted they call if they needed anything. Jessica, Isabella said as they stood in the hotel lobby. Why are you helping us so much? You don't know us. This is not your problem. Jessica thought about how to answer that question. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure herself. Maybe it was because she remembered her own parents' stories about arriving in America with nothing but hope. Maybe it was because she had lost a pregnancy once and knew how precious and fragile these moments were. Or maybe it was simply because she couldn't walk away from people who needed help when she had the ability to give it. Because sometimes strangers become family, she said finally. And family helps family. As she drove to her business meeting, Jessica's phone buzzed with a text from her boss. Henderson Group called. They want to move the meeting to 4 p.m. Hope that works for you. Jessica smiled and typed back. Perfect. I have something important to take care of first. 3 months later, Jessica received a photo message on her phone. 2 tiny babies, side by side in matching pink oneskins, each with their own healthy heart. The message below was in Spanish, but she understood every word. Mila and Sofia Rodriguez Martinez, born healthy and perfect. Thank you for being our angel. Jessica had never made it to her Henderson Group presentation that day. Instead, she had spent the afternoon helping Diego and Isabella navigate the hospital system and apply for emergency financial assistance. The Henderson account went to another agency, but Jessica discovered something much more valuable than any business deal. She learned that the best investments aren't always measured in dollars, and that sometimes changing someone else's life changes your own in ways you never expected.